大家下午好，很高兴今天有机会与你们讨论中国对德国这次投资，也非常感谢主办方邀请我来。Or in English, welcome from my side too. I'm very happy to talk to you this afternoon about the challenges and opportunities of Chinese investment in Germany, and of course thank you to the organizers for having me here in Bremen. First of all, I would like to introduce the topic by drawing your attention to a major trend in globalization over the past 20 years, and that is increasing foreign direct investment from developing countries. We are used to the fact that developed countries invest abroad and build their factories in China or elsewhere, but in recent years emerging countries have started to go abroad too. Of course, China is leading this trend, this development, since in 2017 China accounted for about 1/3 of emerging markets FDI, whereas compared to 1990 it was only 6%. And you also see that compared to 1990 the factor between FDI from developed and developing countries has decreased to only 3, whereas it was 18 in 1990. So this really is a huge development, or we could even call it a mega trend, very suitable for the new program we formed in Bertelsmann Stiftung last year, in which, for example, deals with globalization as one mega trend we see today. So China has become a major outward investor among emerging countries, but also in general. In 2017, China already was the top 3 when it comes to foreign direct investment abroad, and that is globally. So China has already surpassed important investors such as Germany or the United Kingdom. In 2017, the United States ranked first and Japan ranked second. China even was number 2 in 2016, but since these are flows, so annual FDIs, it's changing. But China has been among the top 3 for quite a few years now and was responsible for nearly 9% of global FDI in 2017. However, if we compare the FDI stock that is accumulated foreign direct investment over time to China's GDP, which is something economists like to do very much. They put everything in relation to GDP to see in how far the economic performance of a country suits a certain indicator, such as FDI, for example. And you see here that China is still far away from the US or Germany when it comes to this ratio. For China, it's only 13%, and for the US, it's 40%, for Germany, even 47%. So we can see that China still has huge potential to increase its foreign direct investment abroad in the years to come. Looking at the regional distribution of China's FDI, we see that very clearly China's Asian neighborhood is the hotspot of China's FDI and not Germany. Looking into German media, you sometimes think that 80% of China's FDI come to us in Germany, but that is definitely not the case. Hong Kong, of course, and the rest of Asia is important for China's FDI. Europe gets a chunk, 5%, and only 1% of China's annual FDI flows actually go to Germany. Of course, I have to say that national statistics always have their restrictions, since some companies invest abroad via Hong Kong or other countries. So probably there is more Chinese FDI to Germany than the national statistics tell. But there are estimations which try to take this factor into account. It's more, of course, but it's not 80%. So still Asia is an important destination for Chinese FDI, which is very natural since there is cultural and geographical proximity, and Asia is a very important production network in itself. Zooming into the European Union now, we see that Germany is among the top goals of Chinese FDI in the EU, even though only about 1% go to Germany each year. Germany has been among the top 3 destinations in the European Union for quite a few years in a row now, ranging from 1 to 2 to 3, depending on each year's changes in FDI flows. So we could ask the question, why do Chinese companies want to come to Germany and invest here? They have huge Chinese markets, then they can invest in Asia and so on. But I think we heard a few reasons why they come here from Margaret already. Of course, Germany has a lot of interesting companies with high tech and know-how, qualified engineers and high-skilled workers. This, of course, is one reason why Chinese companies invest in Germany. Chinese companies want to benefit from the label Made in Germany for their technology, and they hope they can become part of this very well-reputed label if they have subsidiaries and production facilities or innovation centers, R&D centers in Germany. Also, Germany has a very benefitable position within the European Union. That is from the perspective of Chinese investors. They see Germany as a door to the European common market. So they hope that once they have set up in the German market, they can access other European markets from here, EU markets. Another thing which is very interesting and which is, for example, mentioned very explicitly in this Invest in Germany guideline by the Ministry of Commerce of the People's Republic of China, is the level playing field. In this brochure, MOFCOM states very clearly that Germany offers a level playing field for foreign investors. The German investment environment does not discriminate against foreign investors. So Chinese companies can compete on equal footing with domestic companies. Of course, we all know this is not the case for foreign investors in China, and I will come back to this aspect later on. Now, Chinese companies are going abroad. They have to deal with intercultural differences, such as German companies used to have to deal with in China. So what do Chinese investors learn from the Ministry of Commerce? The Germans are punctual. They love rules and order. You can't smack or slurp loudly while you eat. Loud talking or screaming in public is undesirable. That's what the Ministry of Commerce teaches Chinese investors who want to go to Germany, among many other things, of course. But this is very interesting because Chinese investors are now in a very different position than they used to be. The so-called normal direction would be a German company sets up a facility in China. So they have to deal with Chinese employees and the Chinese investment environment. That means they have to prepare because they are guests in this country. Nowadays, as Chinese companies go abroad, they have to do the same thing. So they have to deal with a completely different investment environment. And that means that in China we have some kind of mushrooming of intercultural trainings, which are very well known in Germany and widespread. And in China we see the same trend. So Chinese investors have to deal with soft factors themselves now. Maybe that will lead to more understanding by Chinese investors of foreign investors in China and the difficulties they face when they go there. Of course, this guideline deals with a lot of other issues like legal issues and tax issues in Germany and so on. But I think this is a very interesting aspect here. Looking at Germany, we have, unsurprisingly, a similar situation as with China, since Germany has the EU as China has Asia. So most of the FDIs Germany receives are from inside the European Union. Of course, we have the same thing here, that some Chinese companies might have invested in the UK or in France and then via France invest in Germany again, and you don't see the full picture here, but it's just for the relation. China only accounts for like 0.4, 0.5% of Germany's foreign direct investment stock. This figure has not changed so much over the years. So you see that we have increases in mutual investment, especially the direction to Germany from China, but still it's not a huge chunk of Chinese investment that goes to Germany. However, looking into German media again, we see a lot of interesting headlines which you will hardly find on other investors, on investors from other countries. Of course, we have the China invasion. Chinese are making fat prey in Germany's Mittelstand, which of course is the backbone of our economy. Chinese do everything on a grand scale, be it innovation or investment abroad. They are on a shopping spree here, and it's always our hidden champions, that is world market leaders in certain technologies or Mittelstand. Or just the Chinese are coming, reminding us of all the negative connotations associated with the Russians are coming, obviously. And I've been researching this topic for a long time, and I found this headline the first time in 2005, when actually nobody was really talking about this issue yet. And the latest I found was over here, but I guess if you would go into 2018, you will find another one of these. So China as an investor does not enjoy the best reputation in Germany, which is kind of strange because there's no large-scale investment from China. Of course, the reason why is that China has a very different political system, and I think Margot made that very clear in her presentation, that this is a real issue for a market economy and democratic countries such as China. As with the innovation system, China supports foreign direct investment and especially mergers and acquisitions through several industrial policy strategies. The oldest one being the Going Global strategy, which was already stipulated in 2000, which explicitly supports the going global of Chinese companies very broadly. We have the Belt and Road Initiative, which also is linked with foreign investment. It's not a very strong focus, but it's still, there's a link. And of course, the most recent one, published in 2015, is Made in China 2025. Made in China 2025 has a strong foreign investment component, especially M&A, in order to make Chinese companies leapfrog certain technological developments. So access to foreign technology is a very important part of Made in China 2025 via M&A. And you see here the Going Global online platform by the Ministry of Commerce, which bundles all these initiatives and which gives foreign investors but also researchers a good overview of what is happening in terms of the going global of Chinese companies. You have statistics, you have investment guidelines. Here's a separate card for the Belt and Road Initiative and many other things. So you can find out enterprise names investing abroad. You can register online for certain bureaucratic formalities, so you can do these online and so on. So this is an important resource if you research that topic. The political system is, as I said, the reason why there's a lot of mistrust against Chinese investors in Germany now, and this is also due to especially Made in China 2025. This is why we took a deeper look into Chinese M&A in Germany and the question how they might link with Made in China 2025. This is taken from a study I published last year for Bertelsmann Stiftung, and we tried to fit Chinese M&A here with the 10 key sectors of Made in China 2025. And one of the key results was that 2/3 of Chinese M&A between 2014 and 2017 actually match one of the 10 key sectors. And these are in the sectors where Germany is especially strong, which is not surprising because there's the high-tech Germany has in these sectors, like automotives, but also biomedicine, biotechnology, or machine tool manufacturing. So basically the sectors in which Germany's exports to the world are very strong too. We also found that 2/3 of Chinese M&A in Germany are actually conducted by privately owned enterprises. However, those who know China and research China also know that private ownership does not necessarily mean that there is no state influence. But it's very hard to prove or to base any policy on something which is more or less informally known, but which you cannot really prove. We know that there was a new guideline making companies establish party cells within the companies which want to actually influence management decisions, and this is a strong indicator that there is state influence in privately owned companies, but it's hard to prove because for the formal ownership, they are private companies. Then of course you have state-owned companies where it's very obvious, and you have companies which are directly owned by the central government through the state administration of state-owned assets. This is SASEC. And these are the companies which can be regarded as the prolonged arm of the Chinese central government. And this is very clear that we have state influence involved. But the problem for Germany, also when it comes to policy making, are the informal connections linked with private ownership in China. We also found that there is that regions where we see Germany's hidden champions are clearly in focus. Hidden champions is more or less the definition of a company which has a technological edge in a certain niche and is a world market leader in terms of market share. There are 3 federal states in Germany: North Rhine-Westphalia, Baden-Württemberg, Bavaria, also unsurprising, where we see a high density of hidden champions and also patent applications, and also Chinese M&A are the most in these 3 federal states. So we see a close link between Made in China 2025, Chinese acquisitions in Germany, and the acquisition of high tech in certain industries. So it's also matter of fact that there are clear reservations about Chinese investment in Germany that is among the broad population. You see here a representative survey by Allensbach, which is a survey institute well known in Germany, showing that actually 2/3 of the population in Germany think that the government should better protect German companies from being acquired by a Chinese investor. You also see these reservations on the policy level, on the government level, but also among business circles. People from business will not talk too openly about these reservations, but if you have the chance to discuss bilaterally, you will also hear this. Of course, German companies are afraid of their China business because it's a very important market for for German companies, and they are afraid of reducing their business opportunities if they too openly utter these reservations about China and if they too heavily criticize China. But it's obviously there. So what has happened recently is that 3 states in the European Union, Germany, France, and Italy, have pushed for more restrictive regulation on the EU level when it comes to foreign acquisitions. They wrote a letter to the European Union stating that due to unfair competition by China, we need to look more closely into high-tech acquisitions by China in the European Union. And recently there has been published the European Framework for Screening Investment, which is restrictive, so it does not touch all M&As by third countries in the European Union, but only certain fields where EU money is involved. But it also establishes some kind of information framework for the European Union member states. So the goal is to exchange more information on foreign investment in the European Union in the future and to collect more reliable data on Chinese and other foreign investment here. If you research FDI, data are a real issue, so I definitely welcome this initiative in this regard. Since you only have national statistics and of course some international, but it's very difficult to match all these data and get a very reliable and comparable source. So we see that the reservation have had some impact on policy making already on the EU level and also in Germany. I will come back to that in a minute. And I would like to wrap up a bit opportunities and challenges of Chinese foreign direct investment in Germany. First of all, opportunities, which I have not touched upon yet. Foreign direct investment in general leads to job creation in the host country, in many projects at least. We see capital inflow from the outside, fresh capital, which is not a bank account or credit. That is very important for small and medium-sized companies in Germany, which face hardships when they go to their bank and they want money. They don't really get it. So we have the saying in Germany that in Germany you only get credit when you don't need it. And SMEs are those needing credit most. So many of them are happy when Chinese investors come in and really bring in money and invest. Also, as I mentioned, the Chinese market is very important for German companies, especially in the high-tech field and also in other areas. So FDI from Chinese investors, but of course also from other FDI destinations, can lead to better integration between the two markets, be it the Chinese and the German market, or the French and the German market, or the Japanese and the German market. So basically this is good in times of global value chains, which are very much interconnected. And value chains cross borders, they don't stop at borders, this is a truism. So it's very important to integrate important markets together. Also, FDI as a direct investment are supposed to be long-term. This is the economic definition of direct investment, as opposed to portfolio investment below 10% of the shares, for example. Portfolio investments are supposed to have to pursue a short-term interest, but FDI are really interested in the location. And you see that with FDIs that many companies that have invested here in Germany in the form of FDI, they stay here for many years, they create jobs, they bring in capital, and they also go to several locations, one after the other. However, when it comes to Chinese FDI, this long-term perspective might also be a challenge, since we do not know the future, as Margot said, and this is also true for FDI. Chinese FDI in Germany is a short-term development so far. So we've seen FDI for a couple of years now. There are some FDIs by Chinese companies, acquisitions of German companies, which took place 14 years ago, 3 or 4. They do fairly well, but the large chunk of acquisitions and other on greenfield investment have been there for like 3 to 4 years, and this is really short term. So we don't know what will happen to the technology and the location. There might be a sell-off in the end when the Chinese mother company has learned all the technology they want to, and they have trained their employees. According to the German engineers, they might say, okay, now we don't need the location in Germany anymore. However, I'm rather optimistic on that, I have to say, since we also have digitization, which could lead to relocation in the long run. So 3D printing, for example, you don't produce in China anymore, but you produce in Germany. So the Chinese companies will need access to the local customers. That's why I'm rather optimistic that many of the acquisitions in FDI will stay in Germany for the long term, but you never know. Of course, we have intercultural and systemic differences, which are really huge. Actually, the differences when it comes to the political system are getting greater since the new government has taken office in China. We see a re-centralization of power with Xi Jinping, and we see that he kind of propagates the competition of systems again, which we thought was dead quite some time ago, but it's not. So we have to deal with that. Germany is a market economy and a democracy. China is not both. It's neither a democracy nor a market economy. So it's a very big question for Germany, also on the policy-making level, how we deal with China in the future. China is a very important economic partner for us, so we have to deal with China somehow. But we have to find a good way how to deal with China, and I think this has not happened yet. The discussion about this has just begun. Of course, it all comes down to state influence. How far is the Chinese state going to interfere in the economy, and how much state can Germany take in the end? One of the most important tensions in this regard is the level playing field, which exists in Germany for foreign investors, for Chinese investors, but does not exist in China for German or other foreign investors. So in the lack of reciprocity, the very difficult word coming from the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and in this context it basically means equal market access. So this is one of the biggest challenges in the relations between China and Germany and China, the European Union. And this is topic of all the high-level dialogues and all the low-level dialogues between China and Germany and the EU, and it's been going on for quite 17 years now, ever since China joined the WTO. So, a brief conclusion and outlook what Germany can do or has already done. To look on the bright side, Germany is an attractive investment destination, and this is good because we are an aging society. We have a large capital outflow as well, so we need capital to come in. We need investment from all sides. And the positive effects of FDI are quite clear. Tax revenue, value added taking place in Germany and not elsewhere, improved international interconnectedness and access to global markets, and of course job creation, which is most important for our politicians. I personally think we need a more differentiated discussion on foreign direct investment in general. Foreign investment can happen via mergers and acquisitions, but also via greenfield investment, that is the establishment of a new factory or an R&D center on the green field, so to say. So there was nothing and now there's a factory, there are production facilities, and there are jobs. And this is the kind of investment, of course, every country hopes for because its positive effects are probably the greatest. Then we have M&A, which can have more negative effects because some companies might buy up a company and just sell it a few months later. You often see that with financial investors, which look more towards shareholder value. When it comes to Chinese investment, I think you also need this differentiation because we see a very strong focus, especially in media, on M&As. But we also have greenfield investments. Huawei, for example, set up several research centers in Germany. That would be greenfield investment. And there's not so much discussion about these. Maybe we need more, because also via greenfield investment you could steal technology, but via greenfield investment you also contribute more to the local economy. So it would be very good to take this, have this in mind when discussing FDI. A key for cooperation with China in regard to FDI, but also in regard to other issues, innovation would be one, is an equal framework, so equal footing for companies investing in each country. I just mentioned that China became member of the WTO 17 years ago. That's a really long time. China has had a lot of time to implement WTO provisions, and it has not come as far as it should have in this time from a Western perspective, of course. If you ask for the Chinese perspective, they say they adapt in their own speed because they are a developing country. Of course, that's their point of view. But from a Western point of view, it's very annoying what has happened there. So we still have no level playing field for foreign investors in China. So what should happen as quickly as possible is that the principles of reciprocity and everything laid down in WTO provisions are applied in China. So what can Germany do in this regard, or has already done? For Germany on the national level, something has happened when it comes to investment screening. Germany has changed again its screening process for foreign acquisitions. It has lowered the threshold for screening from 25% to 10%. This is only for acquisitions in sensitive fields which touch upon national security, for example. So it's a tiny part of foreign M&A in Germany. It would not have applied to KUKA, for example, coming back to this case. Germany, of course, strongly supports the approach on the European Union level to have a common framework for investment screening and gather information within the European Union. We have seen now this framework for investment screening in the European Union, and maybe more will happen in the years to come. So since they are just trying out how they can work together on foreign direct investment, for Germany it's always important what's happening on the European Union level, since the competency for investment and also investment treaties is within the European Union and has been so since 2009. So Germany cannot do a lot of things on the national level. I already mentioned that there are negotiations going on an investment treaty between the European Union and China. For Germany, this is very important because Germany is very much in favor of negotiations with China. Of course, negotiations have been going on for 5 years now on this investment agreement, and it's rather difficult, but at least both sides agree that market access should be part of the treaty. China did first not want to deal with market access in this agreement, but now it's on the table and both sides are exchanging proposals on how to improve market access, especially in China. So this is a progress. Germany is a large export-oriented country, so it's always in Germany's best interest to have some kind of agreement and treaty where both sides can agree upon, and not so much to recur to protectionist measures. So this would be Germany's favorite, so to say. Well, as you see, something has happened already in regard to Chinese investment in Germany. More restrictions have been published on the EU and the national level, but there's also a solution which could be negotiated, and of course Germany would be very much in for this. And on this point I would like to close, and now I'm looking forward to your suggestions, comments and questions. Thank you.
Okay, anyone have a burning question? Yes, burning, not burning. But maybe you should...
No, please, go ahead.
Cora, I really enjoyed your presentation, and I have a lot of questions, but maybe I restrict myself to 3. First of all, I'm a bit confused when it comes to the legal situation framework for designing policy. I think the Lisbon Treaty has given the right to create a framework, a legal framework to the EU Commission. And the EU Commission has promised to have the EU-China investment treaty discussed, but it takes so long, and the problem, of course, is the negative list and all that. But can on the national level, can we really decide on something? I mean, we did this with lowering the control level for investment, but do we have the right to do that? Is the first question. The second question, I think with the investment of Chinese companies, we have maybe to look at the post-merger period and ask whether these companies are contributing to innovation by, for example, publishing patents or whatever, creating a larger R&D center. So what is really the effect of this investment in Germany? And the third question, what you think about it, I want to ask. And the third question is, if you look at these KUKA, for example, high technology, robotic, going to China in an environment where we mostly have a 2.0 industry, not 4.0. So in a completely different environment. Can they really profit from that in the sense that we have to be afraid of it? This one.
Okay. First on the investment treaty, well, the competency to negotiate is on the EU level. But of course the member states can support the process. So supply experts and information and so on. But the decision is with the European Commission and also the negotiation mandate. So this has moved from the national level to the EU level. And Germany has a bilateral investment agreement with China dated 2005, before the Lisbon Treaty. That was only between Germany and China, but now it's on the EU level. But
is this still working as a framework legal system?
As far as I know it is, because there is no replacement yet. Okay. But the EU treaty will of course replace the existing treaties. But it has to be negotiated by the European Commission, and they've been doing that for, well, in 2014 they started, and they had to make sure that market access is part of the treaty first, and they achieved this. So personally I think that really is progress, because it's all about market access after all. And for Germany it would be great to have this agreement, and also German business is in favor of this, but you need more. You also need some kind of pressure, and that's why we also have national legislation when it comes to foreign M&A. So this is some kind of signal showing China, well, we are negotiating with you on the EU level, but we also do something on the national level, because we just want to make sure you know we're watching you. That is my impression, at least. I mean, actually, this national legislation does not really apply to a lot of investments in Germany, because it's very narrowly defined in terms of national security and critical infrastructure.
Just a clarification, so the 35% to 10%, is it specific to China, or it's overall investment screening?
Oh, it's overall. It was 25%, because that's a minority stake with a veto when it comes to shares. Now it has been decreased to 10%, but it applies to all investors from third countries.
That's not really dependent on an investment treaty between EU and China?
No, that's completely separate.
If there is a European framework for investment screening, then that would be a different thing. If there's a unified
exactly, but that probably will not happen.
Okay.
We have this. We have this in European framework for screening only when EU money is involved for very specific research projects, and the most important thing is sharing information, actually. So. But back to the other questions. So the first one on the treaty, the second, sorry, I have to get back to you.
Post-merger.
Oh, exactly, post-merger. I absolutely agree with you. I don't have any empirical evidence on this post-merger period. We are thinking about doing a study on this, actually.
You're working on that.
Oh, that's good to know. I mean, we're not doing that right now, but later on maybe. And the problem is that you have a few cases which are very successful, the older ones, but recently there are a lot of cases which seem to work not so well. I mean, KUKA could be one example, but you never know when you look into the company what really has happened. And my impression is that it gets pinned down to the Chinese investor, that is to the origin of the investor, what is happening. And what we would like to do is take a closer look at FDI, not only mergers and acquisitions, from several countries, and compare if there are differences between Chinese investors and other investors. Because the discussion is always about Chinese acquisitions, but I haven't seen a lot of material looking into other M&A. Maybe we have a lot of similarities between Japanese, US, French and Chinese investors, and it's not so much about state influence, but rather about business motives. You could assume that. Of course, we know state influence with China is specific, but I think it would be important to have empirical data on how foreign investments, M&A in Germany are actually fitting. But maybe we can exchange more in detail sometime. And the third question about Industry 2.0, you mean Chinese companies investing here, buying high-tech and trying to integrate it back?
There was a lot of discussion about our technology going to China, robotic, and I mean the question is, how will it be used in China in an environment which is Industry 2.0, not 2.4? It's not completely automatic. Like smart factories, the idea we have about Industry 4.0. It's not the reality in China.
Well, Chinese companies buying up high-tech here, first they want to have access to the technology here, to use it for advanced markets, not necessarily back in China, but they also want to learn the technology. So what is happening, for example, is that they send Chinese engineers here to get training and to adapt the technology back in China, but adapt it to the local reality. So I don't see any direct transfer of high-tech companies tailored to advanced markets back to China. I don't think that would be working. Probably you have more insights from the business level on that, but that is my impression. You always have to adapt technology. It's not a one-to-one transfer. That's why I'm rather optimistic about technology actually staying in Germany, because part of the technology is in the head of the people. So you cannot just transfer a German engineer to China and then you have the high-tech over there. It doesn't work like that. So you always need some kind of adaptation process. And you still need high-tech tailored for the German market and for advanced markets. And that's what German companies are very well able to do. And the Chinese companies want to access other markets in the European Union, US, and so on. So that they need that premium segment of certain technologies.
Well, thank you very much for the very interesting talk. I do wonder for some time already whether this is indeed kind of just a German perspective or perception of the evil Chinese investment here. If you do this newspaper exercise you did, for instance with the Belt and Road Initiative, there is a lead article from Side magazine like 2 or 3 years ago. Now Europe is going to be floated with plastic Christmas trees, which are floating in since years by ship actually, and they would continue to come by ship and not by train. So there's a lot of, I think, misconception about this, and I wonder if the statistics that you had about the kind of the match between the investments and the kind of overall strategy, or the Made in China 2025 strategy, is there such a statistic also for other kind of maybe more important investing countries into Germany that you know? So is US investments, I guess they will also focus on, let's say, the hidden champions and pearls here, not at the leftovers actually in Germany. Why would anyone kind of go for the leftovers? So I guess that this might be not so different from general investment patterns after all. Maybe it's even surprising that only 2/3 are in line with the strategy, which is, well, kind of not a tremendously high figure, I would say. So I'm not sure if there is a statistic like that, but would be quite interesting just to get an idea of whether this is misconception or reality to some extent at least.
We're working on the statistics actually. So I started with China last year because it was a very hot issue after all. But now we want to exactly do this. That is looking at FDI and M&A, of course, from other countries into Germany and the European Union, and kind of compare it to Chinese FDI and see which sectors are hit or floated by investment from abroad. And my assumption would be that it's, as you said, Germany has a few sectors which are high-tech and which are world market leaders. So any foreign investor aiming for a German company would probably go for these hidden champions. But I'm not aware of any real empirical evidence on that. There are a few studies looking in investments, but this comparison and really getting it down to the point saying actually Chinese investors do not behave so differently from other investors, and really getting it on the street out of the ivory tower. Well, as I said, I'm not so much aware of it, but I think it's important because we see this China bashing getting bigger and bigger in German media, and I would say we should not underestimate China. There are huge challenges and risks involved when dealing with China, but we have to take a pragmatic approach. I mean, we are right now in the middle of a trade war between China and the US, and we are kind of the third person in the room, the European Union, aka Germany. So we need partners in a globalized world, and we need access to the Chinese market. So we have to find a smart way to deal with China. And I don't think, for example, that Trump is the smart way. Well, probably. But the one thing about Trump is that it might make things easier for us, because China is very much under pressure, and China is about to lose much more of this trade war if it's to continue. So it might be a good time for the European Union to get concessions from China and go on with this investment treaty. China knows that it needs partners, and this is one of the reasons why China is trying to play down Made in China 2025 recently. Of course, I'm skeptical about this, but as I said, it's a good time to get closer with China and really get along with the challenges we have in our relationship.
Maybe I can join in with it.
I have one very short.
Good.
So first of all, thank you for the presentation. Yeah. And one thing was you mentioned national security as a relatively narrow concept in terms of Germany. Now when we look at the US, it has broadened over time informally. Do you see a similar movement going on here?
Definitely. It has happened already twice. I mean, this investment screening in Germany used to only tackle defense and cryptographics and all this stuff, so military. The second step was, I think, in 2009, when all these state funds came to invest in Germany. They broadened it to national security in general, sensitive sectors, not only military. The next step was in 2016, 2017, when they took critical infrastructure in. And now they lowered the threshold from 25 to 10%. So we have seen more restrictive regulations in Germany in the last years, but it has not really had a huge impact on investment, because it's still a tiny part of investment that comes to Germany, and it only is for mergers and acquisitions. So greenfield investment is not screened at all, at least not by this national FDI screening.
Right, which beautifully brings me to my question. And this was a good setup for it, because speaking of screening, so the question arises, based on what could you screen? So already the previous question highlighted the fact that we tend to screen based on industry, because we can't screen based on nationality. That would violate, basic non-discrimination. So that doesn't work. So we screen based on industry, so the security, but security is getting broader and broader. The obvious downside to that is that then we are screening out lots of potentially interesting companies and technologies and things that we actually need. So before too long, I think the US proposal, there are some papers talking about that, saying, okay, now you've already blacked out big parts of the economy, and you've basically sort of said you're going to close down this to the rest of the world. Most of the problems here seem to stem from modality. So the fact that these are acquisitions, not greenfield investment. So any sort of ill effects, I mean, you mentioned greenfield is good, it creates jobs, it certainly adds to value added in the location. Acquisitions, they may secure jobs for the time being, but they generally don't create that many. Most of the problem is with acquisition, but we can't ban acquisitions, because then we'd have to ban all the other acquisitions, and as we just said, they are all interested in the same companies, in the same industries. We would have to combine that with nationality, and that wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. And yet, both presentations voice these very real issues about lack of reciprocity and so on. Is there any feasible way to actually conduct screening so that we could in some way protect ourselves against this threat?
Against the China threat?
Yeah.
Well, first we would have to
The Chinese
define
are coming,
if there really is a China threat.
Yeah.
Okay, but nationality really is an issue, and you could really discuss this for hours probably. In a globalized world, do companies still have something like a homeland? Are there really German, Chinese, French companies? In reality, there probably are. And Chinese companies at home operate under very different circumstances than German companies here. But we cannot base any regulation purely on the origin of companies. That does not work, and Germany would not like to do that. Because Germany is, just imagine that Germany was banned from some market, or the label made in Germany would be banned like in the 19th century from the British or the Chinese market. So no, I think we are beyond the point of nationality when it comes to legislation, at least. The key point when dealing with China really is to make China abide by certain international rules and standards. I mean, IPR is one example for that, but also the level playing field back in China is another example. And the problem is that China is moving at its own speed, and it's very, very difficult for Germany as a single country, but even for the European Union to make China move more quickly. IPR protection, as an example, that used to be a huge issue for German companies in China. Nowadays, that Chinese companies have their own IPR and they are very keen on protecting these. It has become much better, but only because Chinese company asks for more protection. And that is good for foreign companies too, because awareness is there now. The same with market access in certain industries, such as automotive, for example. Now the Chinese government is planning to abolish the joint venture, force joint ventures and lower taxes and so on. But that is because they don't think combustion is the thing to do anymore, and they are into e-mobility. So they say, well, let the foreigners come and sell their combustion in China and we go somewhere else. So they have decided now is the time to change this policy. And I don't see a very, as I said, a smart way to deal with this issue, because what kind of leverage do we really have vis-a-vis China? I mean, there are mutual dependencies, and China knows that. And as I mentioned, the trade war might make it easier for us to deal with China, but it's difficult.
Plus there's the seller side, which there's also real difficulties in putting in policies that say you're not allowed to sell your company to the Chinese.
I don't think that would be feasible.
No, it wouldn't be feasible.
No.
Just like screening by nationality is not feasible unless you let go of national treatment, which would be basically throwing out all of the WTO. So.
Also, you have to see that in the past, most developed countries did that. They had this kind of policy in place, and once they were developed to a certain degree, they abolished it. A classical industrial policy and infant industry protection, we've seen that all over if you look into history. But of course policymakers have to make their policies nowadays and not like 100 years ago, so it's really difficult. Margot, sorry.
So screening on national level, would be discrimination. And I think when discussing the topic of actually enhancing the investment screening process in Germany regarding non-European investment, we had the discussion, and there was this Bavarian approach, as Professor Taube actually also introduced to us, which was actually considering state influence or state backing of the company taking over the German one, which was an idea that could eventually be considered, but not feasible in a way, because it's so difficult and you might not get access to the Chinese data in the end, and you don't know if Huawei is a state or private company or other companies, how the state is actually, if the state has a stake in the company, or if not, if it influences it. I spoke to a manager of a Chinese private company, actually in Düsseldorf at an investor forum. He told me, well, we also get some targets from the government, so in the end, from his perspective, all Chinese companies are state companies. If they are actually by law private or state-owned, doesn't matter. That was his opinion. And the second point that was actually discussed last year in Germany was if they should also consider the topic of reciprocity. So if you don't have access to the foreign market, in this case China, then China is not allowed to invest here. They also didn't include that because, again, you have different political systems which you need to balance and need to consider. That was also a topic in discussion now in Davos yesterday or the day before yesterday, and it was between an American person and a Chinese, and in the end they said, okay, we somehow need to find a way to not to try to push our own political system to the other side, but just to be able somehow, they didn't find a solution in the discussion, to somehow accept the other positioning and live with it in that way, but to find a middle way. And I think that is very difficult, and that's what is the German way currently, with lowering the threshold of screening to 10% from 25 to make it easier to screen actually investments and to look into them. And the European Union didn't give a threshold level that needs to be followed, but each member state in the European Union can decide it by themselves. And so there's still some deciding power on national level. Yeah.
That is a very important point. You just mentioned when we start to behave like China, so to say, introducing negative lists and industrial policies and protectionist measures against foreign investors, I think we have a real issue here, because that will be retaliated by China most probably. And we have preached for years now free market access and everything, and if we now turn 180 degrees, I'm not sure how the relations between China and Germany or the European Union will develop in the long run. And if we look back into the reform process, we see that China has already moved a lot when it comes to market access and liberalization, but very slowly and at its own speed. And I think this is our major issue here in Germany and the European Union. And I'm very much in favor of the third way, if we find a smart way to deal with this issue. Margot.
Yeah, there's also an issue related to the buying of companies, especially in the case of KUKA, subsidized loans. So in transparency of the financial sources Chinese companies use to buy a company. In the case of KUKA, there were bidding for a price 3 times as high as the other one. So this is the problem of not a level playing field. And there's the OECD regulation on subsidies, which can be applied to these cases as well. At least it is discussed. So giving more transparency and allowing maybe to see where the sources are coming from.
Mm-hmm. And also EU state aid. This also creates an unlevel playing field for EU companies in the European Union, because they are not allowed to use state aid to buy companies, but Chinese companies can do this. However, in the case of KUKA, there was the discussion was a little bit more differentiated, as I remember, since when a company is very interested in a certain technology, they might pay a higher price, that is the goodwill, business people call it that way, for the company, which is much, much higher than what competitors would pay, because they don't value the technology that high. So of course you have state subsidies, that is a truism actually, but it also happens that some companies might pay a higher price for a high-tech company than others. Yeah.
I think that the pricing is quite natural. So they have their home market, the Chinese big home market. No other country has that. So if they bring the technology to the home market and market their the new technology there.
No, I'm talking about subsidized loans for companies going abroad, buying foreign companies. This is part of the Stiftung program. So this is
zero interest loans, or
reducing the risk of taking over a company.
But they also
would not be able to do it.
But they can also pay higher prices. That was the argument, that the high price for KUKA was based on state subsidies or subsidized loans.
Yeah.
That could be one reason, but the other is the one I just mentioned, that for Midea it had, yeah, so we have both sides.
I mean, companies have to show where the funding is coming
That would,
and that's actually something you can screen for. You can insist on more financial transparency and use that as a price.
Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
But if you do that, so then you have the conflict that, for example, in Germany, we have so low loans or interest, and that is a policy. And that as well might be interpreted as a kind of fostering FDI, if you would. Yeah? So where's the start, where's the end point?
Well, I see both sides. On the one hand, it is there. You have subsidized loans, and Chinese companies take the money and go abroad and buy companies. And they also are able to pay higher prices. But the question is the price only that high because it's state subsidies or because the technology is worth so much? But still, the Chinese are only able to pay the price because they have access to cheap money. That is a fact.
Yeah, but you could still screen for just the second component of that and say, if it's truly 3 times worth as much for you, then get the money someplace transparent and make it happen.
Yeah.
Well, that would be a good step, but the question would be how to do that. So what kind of legislation would work
But we
to
have this also,
establish?
the OECD regulation on state subsidies exists. We only have to apply it to these cases.
But is it for Germany or is it just the OECD regulation?
It's for all companies working in these. You can do it. But it's not, very common to do it.
But still, this is one of the issues, how to deal with it. Apply this framework, reform EU state aid system, that would be another possibility to get into this issue. And then the question, would Chinese companies be able to really give all the information needed to comply? I'm not sure about that actually. Yeah.
I have a question on the screening process, maybe you know the answer. How do we define a Chinese company? So, if a Chinese company invests in Germany and buys, for example, KUKA or whatever kind of company, we see if it's direct transaction from China to Germany, we see it's a Chinese company. What about if they have a subsidiary on some island and maybe a daughter company, they buy a Dutch company, and then the Dutch company buys actually a German one. Is it then a Dutch company or is it then a Chinese company? So how far do you go along this line that you say it's actually a Chinese company or whatever? And often it's also, maybe the mother company is on an island and then the main operating unit is in China. So how do you define actually the nationality of a company?
Well, actually, as I remember, the KUKA deal was not a direct deal. It was via several islands and could be traced back to Medea in the end, but it was not a direct deal. So probably with many acquisitions you can trace back via the islands to the actual acquirer, since we have, like when you buy a company in Germany, there are some legislations probably forcing the acquirer to lay open this kind of information, because there was a graph showing exactly where the money came from. And I don't think KUKA or the island investor would do that on free terms. So there are some legislations, but it's the same thing as with national statistics. You can trace back some investment directly to mainland China, then you have Hong Kong, and you can say, okay, you can take these together because many investment come from China via Hong Kong, but you don't get the full picture. So also with acquisitions in Germany, you might not get the full picture.
I worked in transfer pricing for several years, and I mean, I saw a lot of organization trees, and sometimes they have hundreds of subsidiaries, and they have 5 levels until or even 20 levels until you see actually the real unit that you're interested in. And so the question is just how do you define that it's then a Chinese transaction which you want to protect against, and not then maybe a Dutch, Belgium, or whatever kind of, or many countries might be in between.
Well, the acquisitions I looked into could be traced back to China. Not always very easily, but they could be tracked back to China. So you know it's a Chinese investor. And of course there is this gray zone where you don't know it. So
was the decision made then in the Netherlands to buy the German company, or was the decision made? So where's the decision making power? Is maybe a better question than rather.
With Chinese companies, that is being made in China in most cases. I would definitely say that. Okay. So also involved, state influence involved maybe. But this again is the question about transparency and how to increase transparency when it comes to M&A in Germany.
Yeah.
So I'm not a lawyer on M&A, so I can't tell you what kind of information companies have to lay open, but they have to disclose certain information on deals. And the question would be, is it enough for the German government to make good policies on this issue? And that goes too far for me to judge.